I'm Peter Panagore, and I'm a near-death experiencer times two. I've had a bunch of different mystical experiences as well, and I live in the northeast of the United States, quite near Canada.
Let's start with you say you're a two times near death experiencer. So let's start with those.
Yes, my first one was in 1980. I died of hypothermia while ice climbing in Western Canada in the Rocky Mountains in the winter. I made a mistake, and my mistake cascaded into being stuck on this ice cliff, and eventually hypothermia overtook me, and I died. And the second time was more recently, now almost 10 years ago, though. I died of what's called a widowmaker heart attack, and it's a blockage in the heart that survivability is 3 to 5%. And as I was leaving the healthcare center on my way to the catheterization lab, the doctor told my family that I wasn't going to make it because I was an hour away from the cath lab, maybe an hour and 20 minutes, and I'd already been outside my golden hour, and I died in the ambulance. And in both times, I chose to come back, which is it's a rare thing in the NDE world, and I really don't know why I was given the choice, but I was. The first time I came back because my sister had run away when I was 14, and it caused a lot of damage to my family. And I knew that I was shown that my parents would suffer a great deal more if I were to die and stay dead than they would if I would come back. Still wasn't going to be pretty, and it hasn't been pretty. It would have been lots worse. And the second time, my daughter had just left an abusive marriage and had a brand new baby, and I saw my granddaughter's life with me and without me in the same way I saw my parents with me and without me, and I realized that she really needed a male figure. She's 10 years old now. It's been great. I'm the golden Bampa, they called me. The star of my life, and it's been really good. The first time I recognized that the length of my life that I had just died from, I was 20 years old at the time, was the snap of my fingers. And then from that point on, when I chose to come back, I thought being alive was going to be easy, but it turned out not to be. It turned out that my whole sense of timelessness was left behind, and it's been quite the slog. And I prayed for my death, even though I dove into my spiritual life very deeply over those years, those intervening years from 1980 to 2015. I also every day I prayed that I could go home again because I felt like I made a big mistake coming back here because on the other side I had no suffering at all, and I knew that all was going to be well with everybody. So it's not like even though my parents were going to suffer if I didn't come back, I knew that they were going to be fine in the end when they died. But the second time I chose to come back knowing that I was going to live till the next time I died, and that might be a while before that happens. And I came back without this desire to leave. I came back with a desire to stay as long as I can to help my family the best I can, knowing that eventually I am going to get out of here
Mm.
sooner than later because I am aging.
Bless you. And I suppose not many. Well, I suppose many people do know, but you're Reverend Peter, aren't you?
I
So,
am
well,
still ordained
yes.
officially.
So, did your religious journey begin prior to your NDEs, or was that as a result of your NDEs?
Or a little mix of both. I was raised Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox simultaneously. I was mixed, what they used to call a mixed marriage here in New England, and but more particularly, when I was a child, at the age of 5, I had my first out of body experience where, and I call it an angel, but it was an intelligent force that came and took me from my body and brought me into a mystical experience in a heaven of a greater darkness, and in this experience, I understood the existence of wisdom and intellect and knowledge that was way far beyond my human capacity. And I came away with being told that I had made a deal for this lifetime. And it was all non-linguistic. It was all beyond conception. But essentially, I was told that I had already made an agreement to be work for God is the way I interpreted it as a 5-year old, to work for God for the whole of my life. And then I had a whole series of these other mystical experiences between that time and the day that I died. And so, yes, I had a religious background. I went to church, I went to catechism, went to Greek school, all that kind of stuff. Easters, we had 2 Easters every year, the Orthodox Easter and the Catholic Easter. But when I died, the first time, all of my religion went away. It was erased from me. All of my belief systems. There was no belief in heaven. There was no Bible in heaven. There was no concepts in heaven. There was nothing that was human invented at all. There was nothing human at all there. And that the divine beloved light being beyond conception, the ineffable, was the totality of all existence, way far beyond our little tiny planet here on Earth, and religions that are sectionalized. It was enormously infinite and unspeakable, and it was absolute fullness of love and wholeness and being. And there was no gender, there was no religion, there was nothing like that. And so when I came back, that 24 hours after this whole climb began, all of that was erased from me. But I was left befuddled because I felt like I didn't just feel like it. I felt like it, and I was experiencing in an ongoing way that not all of me came back. I was living inside of this body like a biological robot with all my software up in the cloud and just like an app inside of me. And the whole world was different. I was entirely different. And there was light emanating from everything. I could see, I couldn't just see it. Okay. I could see light, but I could feel it and hear it and taste it and touch it and smell it. It was everything. Everything emanated this light being that was beyond that was beyond my ability to understand. And so I came back with a new understanding of myself and my relationship to the world and to the divine. And I needed to figure out a way to understand it because everything that happened to me was beyond my brain's capacity for conceptualizing. And even though the experiences came back with me like a thimbleful of the great ocean, but enough of it came back with me as a living experience that I felt this compulsion to discover a way back to it while I was alive. First of all, I regretted coming back. I was like, oh my gosh, this place is full of terror and suffering. I've come to call it the beautiful hellscape, and that's interior and exterior. And I needed to, all I wanted to do was go back. When I was dead, one of the things that happened to me is that I was instructed not to kill myself. I was shown that I couldn't, I didn't even make my own soul into being. That's a portion of the infinite divine. I didn't even create that. And I didn't create my life for myself either. And I was restricted from suicide. And I'll tell you, I was suicidal for a very long time. And I realized that I couldn't go back. I had this prohibition, so I had to bring it here to me. And so I I I was an undergraduate in English literature. And when I finished my degree, I was going to go to architecture graduate school, like my sister, like my dad, and become a family of architects. But this thing radically changed me. And so a year and a half later, I was trying to figure out what to do with my life because I had to earn a living. I come from a very professional family that's, educated, and, you got to do something with your life. And like, well, what am I going to do with this new thing? And I disappointed my family when I got accepted to grad school in architecture, but I turned it down, and so I went to this monastery that was a Trappist monastery. I went to Catholic high school, all boys high school, very very jock, very sport kind of place. And my senior year, the religion teacher went to this monastery and learned this thing that was called contemplative meditation at the time. It became centering prayer practice, and it's pretty popular worldwide in the Catholic Church among people who like to meditate. And so I learned how to do this in '77. And so after this happened to me, I got back to my university in Massachusetts, and one day I hitchhiked back to my high school, my Catholic high school, And I actually hopped the train and nearly got arrested for illegal train hopping. I hopped this train and rode this train for this while. And I had these, what they're called the bulls, the guys who run the train were chasing after me. I hopped over a fence and I got away. And I went back to my high school and I was talking to this brother who had been a missionary in Kenya. And he was a mystical kind of person. And I knew that even as a high schooler. And I had this long talk with him and he said, you should go to the monastery and talk to them. And I didn't tell him what happened to me because I didn't tell anybody, kept it a secret. So I went back to the monastery and I started toying with the idea of becoming a Trappist monk. But I liked sex, and I thought, how can I possibly, you know, I know
Marry
what
the
I'll do.
two. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't. And so I decided to get a degree. I decided to study it first. I decided to try to study mysticism. I'd been exposed to it through my undergraduate work, through some of the American transcendentalists like Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and some people even like William Wordsworth and Coleridge and a few of those Brits over there and the Romantics. And so I decided to try to get a degree in it. And I applied to Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, and I got into two out of three, and I ended up going to Yale. And the dean of students allowed me. I talked it over with her. She said, "What do you want to study?" I said, "I want to study mysticism," and she never asked me why. I wanted to create a way of thinking about what happened to me. It was all very about me, and I also knew enough at that point that there was a history of practice of mystics that if I could find a practice of how to create a space inside myself, I might be able to bring some heaven here to me and live in that space. But also I wanted to figure out how I could earn a living at it. And so my point at going there was to become a professor of religion, of mysticism, and work at universities. And so in my second year of div school was 3 years. In my second year of div school, the dean called me in and she's given me this 3 year independent study. So I'm working all over the university. She found money to pay for professors for me. She was super duper. And I still talk to her maybe 2 or 3 times a year. She's in her 90s now, has all her marbles. And because I'm so grateful to her. So So she invited me. She's like, Peter, I know you want to do your graduate, your doctoral degree, and I'd already begun talking to about it and trying to work in that direction. She said, but I've been watching you. I've been working in the homeless shelters. I've been helping the food pantries downtown, and the New Haven at the time was one of the poorest cities in the United States. So there's a lot of need. And she said, I think you'd make a good minister. And I said, why? She said, because you had a lot of compassion. And so I decided to give it a try. So my third year of div school, I figured out a denomination, a liberal denomination, ordained women back in the 1890s, was supportive of gay people, did a lot of social services. And I thought I'd give it a 3 year try. And then in the meanwhile, I met this woman and we got married and so I got this job with a really super group of people. And then we got pregnant and I was ready to leave. I was ready to, okay, we're pregnant. I'm going to leave now. I don't want to do this anymore. It's not a good fit for me. And my wife was working as an epidemiological researcher at the medical school at Yale. And when her grant ended because she was pregnant, nobody would hire her. So there was this, it was just, that period of time in American history where, women didn't have the rights they have now. And I hope they keep them. And so I stayed in the church. I hid inside the church for 20 years. And so I was practicing Kriya Yoga and centering prayer practice. I'd read the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and the Vedas and the Yoga Sutras and Paramahansa Yogananda. I read everything. I was doing all this research all the time secretly and doing my practices secretly and adapting my experience to the context of the church without ever telling anybody what happened to me. And I lied. I told two real lies. And the first lie was when I went to what's called my ecclesiastical council, when all of the people get together and I had to write this like 40-page paper and they had to review it. And was I good? Did I have all the right theological tools? Did I have the right attitude and the right theology and all this stuff. And so during this ecclesiastical council, somebody stood up and said, "Do you believe in Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior?" And I said, "Yes," even though no, I don't. I don't have any belief. It's not a, I don't have a belief system. I mean, I believe there, I believe in certain things like that people have the right to vote and, those sorts of things. But in terms of religion, God had no religion. So, so then and the other thing I lied about, three things I lied about. One, that I was a believer. Two, that I was a Christian. And three, that reincarnation is not real. And that's not my experience. I definitely reincarnation was something that's happened to me a whole bunch of times. I saw it when I was dead. So I became a reverend, and I worked in the what became Congregationalists in the United States. They had been Puritans. Some of them had been Puritans when they came over here. They were out of England and had gone part of the Mayflower group that came over here. It became a liberal denomination. I worked inside the church for 18 years, hiding inside the church, basically. And so when I left the church officially, my ordination stuck. I can't, you know, it, it's there. And so, yeah, I'm still ordained, but I still do weddings. I'll do weddings for friends. As a matter of fact, I went to a birthday party the other day, a 50th birthday party for the first gay couple I married, and it was great.
Nice. Very nice. So did you find that you were, through that work, having to teach things that you didn't necessarily agree with or believe yourself?
So part of the role of being a clergy person was I was supposed to do a Bible study in every church that I ever did.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
never did a Bible study. I never, ever, 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 ever did a Bible study because I was afraid I was going to get caught. I preached every week, but I had control over the preaching. And but the Bible study, I would be cornered into a question that I didn't want to answer. And so, fortunately for me, my first parish, I had a senior pastor. He ran the Bible study. My second parish, I had a professor of theology who was a member of my congregation. He ran the Bible study. And the last one, I don't even know how I got out of it, but I did. And I just never ran a Bible study. There's probably a bone of contention between them and me. But so I did my best to avoid the questions, but I I tried to bring the message of hope and love, universal love in everything that I did. And so, as a minister, I wasn't just doing preaching on Sundays and marrying and burying people. I had an angel in my church. This guy who had made multiple millions of dollars moved into town, and on the sly, on the down low, nobody knew it was him. He started funding. I was running the Salvation Army account for the town, like giving money away to people who needed it. And he started dumping huge amounts of money in it for me to give away. And he kind of oversaw it. But we ended up running basically a social work organization out of the church. We repaired people's cars who couldn't afford to get to work. We put roofs on people's houses. We rescued women in domestic violence situations. And it wasn't I was supposed to be working in the confines of the church. It's all about the church. But no, it's not. It was entirely about the entire community. And and so I did a lot of work that put me in challenging and sometimes dangerous situations in the community because of my near-death experience. One, because I know where I'm going when I die. You can hurt me, but you can't kill me. And two, everybody's equal. There's no difference between everybody, rich and poor, white and black, gay and straight. Everybody is the same, has the same, whether even if they are on the other side of issues from me, they have the same divine light inside them. And it's not a conceptualization for me. I see it. It's like I see it in you. I see it everywhere I go. I'm not blind to it. And so my ministry inside the church, I was an oddball among the clergy. uh, when we moved to this island, I was the minister on this island. There's lots of art on this island. There's an art colony and this famous school, and but it was definitely a lobstering rural town in the coast of Maine. And when I showed up there, I had long hair and I wore bare feet all the time. So there was as soon as I got to the island, I was walking around barefoot all the time because basically
Yeah.
earthing all the
Grounding.
time.
Yeah.
Grounding, right, exactly. And the rumors started around about me like that. I was like, who is this weirdo? Um, so I'm a reverend. I left the church after I did 18 years of ministry. I got recruited to television. I did television in the local market on two NBC stations in northern New England as a storyteller for 15, 18 years. 15 years, 18 years as a minister. And I got hired partly in part because of all the work that I had done socially, but also because, um, well, I have a universal perspective. And it's been appealing to Buddhists and atheists and Jews and Muslims and everybody. So anyway, that's what I ended up
Hmm.
doing.
Interesting. Very interesting indeed. So, I suppose your insights from your near-death experiences and other experiences, plus your experience in the church, what are your thoughts on the kind of the core doctrines of the church, such as you say, believing in Jesus Christ as your personal savior, or you go to hell? To me, it seems very difficult to believe because it seems very blackmailing
Mhm.
an ideology. But it's interesting because many people as well who have near-death experiences become more religious in an organizational sense and tend to kind of reinforce those beliefs, whereas I struggle to reconciliate those to, say, your experience, which seems the complete opposite. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. I suspect this, and I don't know this for a fact, but my experience was of a unitive form that was way beyond any religion. I think that there are levels of heaven or experiences of realms of heaven that people have. A lot of people meet Jesus, some people meet Kali, some people meet Muhammad, and but my experience was a stripping away of all that stuff. And so I know that I have a friend whose experience brought him into the church deeply. He met Jesus. I didn't meet Jesus. Jesus wasn't so much a no-show, although I can sarcastically say, yeah, Jesus didn't show up. Yeah, well, every bit of love that existed in the entire universe was present. I lacked nothing. And I I I think that this is what I think happened biblically, okay? So I think that when Jesus died, the disciples began the whole deification of him. If one strips away all of the theology off of the layers of the gospels, the four gospels, and there are many other gospels. Okay, so those four gospels were selected out of this large group of gospels, and there were many different perspectives on the church, on Christianity early on. I could get very deep into that if you're interested. But the four gospels that were selected were each written not by individuals, but by schools of thought with their own political agendas, religious agendas. And if you look at Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John in that order, you can see a development that runs through them. Mark doesn't have a birth narrative, nor does it have the resurrection as it has it in John or even in Luke. It's a very stripped down version of the story. And as the story develops through the centuries, as the books are written, it becomes layered over and over and over again with political perspective, what we want. And so I think the disciples began to deify him, but I don't think that was not his point of view of himself. In John, he talks about make them one as you and I are one. Let them have the love that you and I share. Make your eye single. I think it's in Matthew. Make your eye single, and your body will be filled with light. Things like that. In the Gospel of Thomas, which dug up in 1945 and has not been theologicalized, it's pretty much excluded from the church for the most part. Scholars look at it a lot. I look at it a lot. Jesus is a singleness teacher. He's a oneness teacher in this book. It's very, very clear. And I think that the church in general, and when I say the church, I mean Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, Coptics, um, uh, the need to have power and control is that's how organizations work, by exclusion and by concentration. Keep these people out, make these people come in. And then when I look at the either you believe it's like I worked a lot in domestic violence, and one of the things I heard all the time, it's called coercive control. So the domestic abuser says, "You must love me as I tell you and do what I say, or I'll kill you." And that is, and I worked with, so part of my work was with the Domestic Violence Homicide Review Panel for my state, Attorney General. It was serious work, a lot of murders, and that sure sounds like an abusive God to me. You love me as I tell you.
That's exactly my thoughts as well with it. It's very coercive, very what's the word? Narcissistic, very opposite to what, and very counterintuitive to what is taught about God being all loving, all merciful, and yet he will send you, if you don't believe in it, and in this general idea, if you don't believe in him, you will be sent to hell, not for a long, long, long time, for eternity, outside of time. That's unfathomable to me. And then at the same time, is very merciful and loving to all. And so I've always struggled with the Bible. And I attended a Church of England school for primary school, which is your elementary school, which was, Bible studies every day, etc., etc. Even at that age, I couldn't reconcile the belief because it just didn't make sense to me. And that's I ended up atheistic as a result of that. And I still am to organised religions. But I'm much more on the side of God being kind of a fundamental force to the universe, because I always look at things scientifically. That's just how my mind is. And yeah, I always struggle to reconciliate that kind of belief system, because it just seemed very unfair. Regardless of how good a person you are objectively and morally on earth, if you don't believe in this one being as being God and loving him, because in a way you're having to then force love that isn't necessarily naturally there, you're sent outside of time into this suffering domain forever. And forever is just inconceivably long, because it's not even within time. And it just never made sense to me, or seemed fair at all.
Questions mercy then. If there can be that kind of condemnation, what kind of mercy is there? Well, when I went through what I describe as a purgative fire of divine love during my life review, where I experienced all of the suffering that I had caused in my life from the point of view of the people that I caused it and my own point of view. But I was not judged. It was a purgative cleansing, a fire. It was suffering. I suffered as I went through all of this pain I gave away. But the tidal wave of mercy and love, it was irresistible. It wasn't like I could say no to it. It was, and it was eternally on offer. And it turned out that those were basically my own attachments to myself. In every single circumstance, I was being selfish. And it was really my selfishness that was in the way. And I wasn't judged for it. Actually, I was still loved, even though I had done these things. Even though I had caused pain, even while I was causing the pain, this beloved nature of the divine was still present. It wasn't removed from me. It was still there. It was like, the old jokes where the guy dies and he takes his wheelbarrow full of gold bricks up to the pearly gate and they don't let him take it in. I couldn't take this in. And maybe I would have stayed outside the gates if I hadn't given it up, but I could not give it up. It was too much love. It was like being swept down river, and it's not just a cold river, it's a warm river. It's a warm river because it's geothermal and it's giving you a massage as you go.
Yeah.
That's what it's like.
And it's a very common factor of life reviews, which in themselves aren't particularly common, but certainly are seen, that any judgment that's done is by oneself on one's own impact, and certainly seeing the impact from the point of view of the other person, not just seeing the effect on the other person, but feeling the effect through the other person. And that's a very common thing, as well as what you mentioned, the desire to return after coming back to life. and the suicidal tendencies is very common from what I see in accounts where one has the choice or the imperative to return, because it's almost a very severe homesickness.
That's exactly what it was. Nothing here satisfied me. Everything was empty in comparison. It was like, you have this opportunity to have the best, most expensive, exquisite glass of wine of your life. And then from there on out, you're kind of ruined for everything else.
More than understandable, yeah. And even though I haven't had such an experience myself, I can understand it. I have that sense just inherently that this life is severely unnatural to me and very lacking. It feels like life should be everything you ever wanted or could imagine can be made manifest, but it's like it's not possible in the physical, so it feels like there's always something restricting you and it's against your nature. I feel like I'd like to, if I could, I don't know, I always use the example, create a dragon and go flying across the world and see things. It feels like I should be able to do that. But you can't. It's kind of that limiting, just as an analogy, it's limiting that freedom that it feels like you should have, a creative and experiential nature that you don't have on Earth. And you long for it because it seems so restrictive and so, I suppose there's no better word than restrictive.
That restriction goes away at death.
Yeah, and that would be amazing. But it'd be very interesting if you'd be interested in coming back to discuss the more kind of the theological side of things. I think that's very important, seeing as how, maybe not so much in the UK, but definitely in the US, it's the overarching lifestyle and belief system at the moment. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on the limitations and the kind of the falsehoods in that. If you'd be interested.
I'd be happy to talk about it. Yeah,
that'd be great.
Yeah. One thing is that an interior life makes a big difference in a person's existence here as we relate to other people, but not everybody can practice meditation or do yoga or something like that. And so simply being kind, that's it. Simply being kind when you can be, loving people when you're able to. That is it's not only the grease of the wheels of civility, it's the treasure of the heart. And because when I died, I couldn't bring in those things in, the pain that I had caused. I couldn't go in. But what I did bring in with me was all of the love that I'd given away in my life and all the love that had been given to me. It's what enabled me to connect with the love that was on offer for me. So, it's love the one you're with. Love, love, love is the Beatles saying. Rumi talks a lot about love. Jesus talks a lot about love your enemies. Love really is the kingdom of heaven here.
It's interesting that, to me, it feels very natural to kind of be kind and giving by default. But for many, that seems to not exist, that sense, that default kind of loving nature. Many people seem unable to be giving and to be anything but selfish, especially those who, say, have some kind of clinical psychopathy. Why do you think that sort of personality exists, and why, if this spark of love is all inside us all, why is it that many people seem to lack empathy? And indeed, some people just don't have the capacity to feel empathy or love at all.
Well, I think a couple of things. One, I don't think it's always been that way. I think that I read a lot of history and a lot of anthropology and a lot of human psychological history, and it seems that the languages of, say, for instance, Aramaic, they were, or even looking at Japan today as a cultural context, it's less about the individual and more about the society. And I think that tribalism, that idea of, especially happened in nomadic groups, the tribalism where the group identity mattered more than the individual identity. I think that a person who is selfish in that context is selfish for the community. And so that it's for the benefit of the survival of the species, I think, that there are these, I don't want to call them abnormalities because they've been with us forever. They're not really abnormalities.
But they do certainly seem against the nature of the human being who, in a physical and evolutionary point of view, are societal mammals. We survive and live best when we work together. Same
And
as
I
all the
think
other
that
great apes, you know.
right, I think that the extreme ends of those were excluded from society, tribal society. If you weren't, if you were out for yourself and not for the group, you probably still had offspring, but eventually you'd be, excluded or
Outcast,
forced
yeah.
to not be like that. But yeah, I think that I think DNA has a lot to do with it. I mean, you can't. So a person who's has some kind of psychopathy that's based in their biology. What are you going to do about that? I mean, there's this like in the DNA, and the more that there are people, the more that that strain gets through. It's like in the old days when wondering why the suddenly it turns out there's like 5 or 7 or 10% of the population's gay. It's never been that way before. Well, yes, it's always been that way. Because the genes get passed on, and so people who are born with these, like, there's a lot of autism today, more than there used to be, apparently, or we're better at identifying it. I don't really know, but the advantage of certain autistic capabilities is advantageous to the human species.
Yeah.
I used to sail with this guy who I was crew for him for a few years. He was pretty heavily autistic, and nobody could stand him. Nobody could sail with him because he was always very, very direct. I loved this guy. We got along really well because I liked that part of him. But being with him on the boat, my God, that guy, he was like the best sailor I knew because his capacities were beyond pretty much anybody I knew because of his autism. And imagine that kind of skill when you're out there hunting saber-toothed tigers. It'd be great to have a person like that, in the tribe. So but now, at least in our American culture, and I don't really know about your culture as much, but in our American culture, individualism is the dominant theme. So selfishness becomes it's like that movie Wolf of Wall Street back from when it was the 90s. I mean, that becomes honored. It becomes celebrated. If you can become the powerful person through deception and any means that you can, well, then everybody loves you. Well, except for they don't. They actually fear you.
Indeed. And, talking about selfishness in psychology, there are kind of two sides to it because there is a positive or so-called positive selfishness and a negative selfishness. Positive selfishness is necessary because, you have to look after yourself in order to be able to live well. But as you say, such as Wolf of Wall Street, there's a lot of more narcissism, I suppose, than selfishness,
Yeah.
but definitely negative selfishness. But you can certainly see that as you say, it's become the more dominant mindset these days in the West, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame because there really is an increase now in the lack of empathy and the lack of just an organic feeling of love for other people that you see. Maybe less so where we live because we're out in the rural area, so there's less of that competitive environment. But it is certainly a shame to see that we kind of have turned our back on our nature as social creatures.
To the detriment of our society. Someone, and I'm not sure who it was, recently was in the news saying that the biggest problem with Western civilization is empathy. And today, so because in our country all sorts of things are being cut right now, my local food pantry, that it's now it's in getting into desperate situation. We have a lot of poverty where I live. I live a lot of wealthy people, a lot of poverty, and the food pantry has been a boon to our society here. And they're like, we've been cut. Now what are we going to do? All these people are going to go hungry. So they're asking the community, and so the community is in general. I know that we're all going to step up in some way, and small ways, big ways, and it doesn't matter where you land on the political spectrum because we're a community of people. And so one of the things that I like about living in the rural area is that someone can have a diametrically opposed political point of view than I do, and we'll still help each other. We'll still, we just do. It's just the way we are here. And because for centuries, no one else was going to help us because we were so isolated. And so I love that about where I live. We reach across the aisles and empathy. That's what it really is.
For sure. And it certainly saddens me, especially because I work a lot online. When you look in social media, you see so much conflict between people of different religious views and nasty, nasty, nasty confrontations between them for a difference of opinion. And to me, that just seems so sad. I suppose, and unnecessary. The definition of a word can cause war between people and death threats, and you think it's such a sad environment for us to live in and for children to be raised in.
That's the history of religion, arguing over wars over words, meanings. And so in our little town where I live, uh, on Facebook, there'll be discussions of about religion, and everybody's pretty civil. And if someone gets stepped out of line, then everybody's like, "Don't be such a jerk." Um, and but I think that the problem is anonymity online.
For
In
sure.
my experience, if people are anonymous, they got a pseudonym. They feel more emboldened because they know that they can't be attacked. They can't be, and so I'm an advocate for I use my real name online. I don't, everywhere I am, I have my real name. Everywhere I'm on because I disagree with anonymity. One of the things that I learned in the church was if somebody sent an anonymous letter, and I got plenty of those anonymous letters, I learned really early on to crumple it up and throw it in the trash and don't even read it. If someone is trolling you, and they're anonymous, don't even talk to them because they're just emboldened by because they have a mask on. And they probably wouldn't be that way if they didn't have a mask on. So, and I can't change that in our social media world, but I would if I could. One of the things that's different now than it ever was before 1960s is cardiac care has been bringing people back to life. And so there's a lot more near-death experiencers by the tens of millions. And so part of the reason why I'm talking to you, Darren, besides the fact that you were kind enough to ask me to come and speak with you, which I'm very happy to do, is that there's an opportunity now for, well, this conversation to be happening all over the world.
And to
so
be
a step in
taken
the right
seriously
direction.
as well.
Exactly, which is what you're doing here. You didn't have a near-death experience. You're atheistic toward religion. You're a science brain, which, by the way, I love science. I read science every day. I'm deep into it, and but your platform is giving the voice to this phenomenon for bringing it into the public square. And if it becomes into the public square more and more, the more people talk about it, the more valid it becomes in the public mind, the easier it is to have these kind of conversations wherever we go.
Yeah. And I think the key thing that, humble as I can, that I think I do well, is I always approach things with no belief, and I think it's important to play devil's advocate and really doubt these experiences as much as you can when talking to folks like yourself and others, just to weed out any possibility of not getting to the absolute truth of what these experiences mean. And, it's the same with those that disagree with our position. I spoke with Susan Blackmore recently, who is on the other side of the fence. And despite, I disagree with her, I will take on board absolutely everything that she says. And if I agree with something and it challenges what you believe, then you adjust, because that's the only way you learn. And I think there's a lot of platforms out there, a lot bigger than my own, that unfortunately are over the top invested in one belief system and never explore the other. And unfortunately, that doesn't advance the phenomenon as a genuine thing, and only brings woo-ness towards it, I suppose, and less seriousness, which I think is the wrong way to do it. But good luck to them. It's just not my approach.
Well, I agree with you, and I agree with you because of science. I'm all in favor of brain science and brain exploration and understanding how this whole thing works. And if it turns out, and I don't think it will, okay, because of my experience, but if it turns out that the whole thing was in my head, then that's what happened. If they can prove that, but that's not really what I think is real. But I want them to examine that because I want them to know. I don't stop the scientific research because it's scary. It'll destroy my belief. Well, if it does destroy, not that I have a belief, but if I had a belief in this, if it did destroy it, then so be it. I'd much prefer to have the truth than anything else.
As long as
And
those that do investigate these things scientifically are just as open to both results. It could be, if most people that study this kind of thing that I see from a neurological point of view, neuroscientific point of view, are kind of very much on the materialist side of things, which they would be because that's the nature of that discipline. But as long as one is also open to the possibility that we are correct in our belief thus far, then that is taken on board, which is where people such as Sampania and others are important.
I was going to mention him.
Yeah, yeah.
He's a Brit too.
He is. University of Southampton. I've reached out to him, but I've never heard back, unfortunately. He'd be a very interesting one to talk to because he's doing what he should do in the sense that he's keeping very much in the middle. He's not outwardly expressing his belief, but he's saying what the evidence says from his interpretation of it, which is the right thing to do because, again, evidence should lead belief, not the other way round, because then you fall into cognitive biases and things like that, confirmation biases, and all these other scientific jargon things that seem unnecessary but are very much influential.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I was in an interview with him once. When my book first came out, he was the other guest on this radio show that I was doing. It was public radio in the United States, and he was the other guest, and it was fascinating to hear him to be exactly as you said, right in the middle. This is before his. I think he had one study out, one of the awareness studies out at that point. Now he's got two or three studies out, three studies out,
Two,
I think, at this point.
I think he did aware two. I think he's
Yeah, and then
involved
he's
in a
got a
third,
new.
but yeah.
The paper came out about 2 years ago on a third paper. I probably have a reference to it. If afterwards, maybe I'll email it to
Sure,
you. I'm pretty sure I
that'd
have
be
it.
great. I'll put it in the
I'm
description.
yeah, let me make a note here so I don't forget to do that. Samponia, Sam.
But certainly what I like about him is he has the mark of a true scientist in the fact that he will say, we don't know. But this is what the evidence suggests so far.
Love that. I love that. And another one like that is Dr. Bruce Grayson from the International Association for Near-Death Studies and Dr. Marjorie Woollacott for a second.
The University of Virginia.
Yes, yeah, the University of Virginia. This skepticism in science is what makes it real. If you, you let the evidence show what it is, not what you want it to be.
So I suppose one last question. What was it that made you consider your experience objectively real as opposed to brain funk, I suppose, your spiritual experiences and your near-death experiences? What was it that convinced you that they were real?
Because everything was different in my world as soon as I came back. The instant I came back, I felt energy from everything. I still feel it, energy, and I could see differently, and I did. I wondered, did I go crazy? Did this thing really happen? Is this absolute? But then all these strange experiences started happening. Initially, I died. I came back. I got back to the university I was at the time. I was on exchange, and I traveled with this theater company for 3 months that I'd been rehearsing in, and I could feel everybody's feelings. Like I was like superpower. I know what you're thinking and feeling. I wasn't reading their thoughts, but I could read what their emotional life. And it was everybody. And it became so that I had to isolate myself. I couldn't control it. It was like out of control. And so I isolated myself by riding. We did 24,000 miles in this theater group. We had a 15-passenger van and a pickup truck with a trailer. And almost immediately, I grabbed my winter sleeping bag and I sat in the back of the pickup truck by myself because I couldn't interact with people all day long because it was too
barrage
confusing.
of emotions.
Right, that were not mine. I didn't know where I began and where they ended. That's one thing. Another thing is that everything glowed. People had this radiance that they didn't have before, well, that I couldn't see before. And I could, and along with their emotions, I could, well, I became a lot less concerned about pretty much everything in my life other than this interior experience. I could tell you lots of stories about it, but why I understood it was real, including the voices inside me that not language, but this constant presence of like a roaring ocean or a roaring waterfall that would not leave me alone. And I couldn't get rid of it. And it was it was everywhere I went and in everyone I met. And the last thing was, is I found myself in love with everybody, like in love with everybody. Not just like liking a person, but I loved everybody in a way that was uh, detrimental to me, caused me problems.
I suppose it's difficult for us who haven't had any of these experiences to kind of intellectually try and understand a subjective experience. It's one of those things you have to experience yourself in order to fully get the understanding of it, which I'd love to have such an experience one day, not through death, ideally, but just so I can kind of feel those things and know, because many people that have these, if not almost all of them, will say it's not a belief, it's a knowledge that these things are real. And I can't explain that, you know.
No, and you're right, it's entirely subjective. And one of the reasons I kept it a secret for most of my life till like 2003 or something like that, somewhere in that neighborhood. And I kept it a secret because it's subjective. I couldn't prove this to anybody. No evidence. I mean, other than my life, the way I was living my life. That's really, and one of the reasons why I finally came out of the closet is that I had lived in this community where I still live in the same town where I was the minister. And I had lived in this town and some terrible, terrible things had happened over the years of my ministry, things where I behaved in certain ways in public settings, that basically when the last terrible thing finally ended, the deacons of the church came up to me and said, we can't believe that you put up with the terrible things that we had done to you. And I finally realized that I could tell them the truth, that I didn't have any faith. You must have had a lot of faith to put up with what we put you through. And I'm like, I don't have any faith. And this is why I was able to do what I did in the face of everything that you all were doing to me, not just the church, but in the town too. And, I was right. And it turns out in the end, the thing that was happening was not my fault. And it was, we had a major embezzlement. And the town, it was terrible. But I couldn't prove it to them. I couldn't prove it to anybody. And I couldn't even prove it to my wife or my parents. My parents really, my dad died not really understanding, not really believing that these things happened to me. He knew that I had changed. The only evidence I had was the way I lived. And I'm definitely not a perfect person, and I still have an egoic self, but I make choices that are based on my eternity, not on my mortality. And I think that that's true for most of us, other than those of us. And I've got this friend Trisha, who was in the hospital when she died, and like they got a measurement on her, like she was dead. I didn't have a measurement on me, and I can't really prove it. But so it's a subjective experience for which I have no evidence, that I don't ask anybody to believe me. That's another reason why I kept it a secret. Why, nobody's going to freaking believe me. Why would they? I wouldn't. My early self, I would not. Woo woo. And so just the way to live. That's my life is my proof. That's it.